So it is March, which means it is time for MARCHintosh. And as you can see, I've got my camera focused on my little simple Mac collection, the iMac G3, 4, and 5. Got a Power Mac G4 down below. Also got this little display set up here. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're going to talk about my latest edition, which technically I've had for a few years. I just haven't done anything with it. But that is the Mac Pro, specifically the 2,1. So we're going to go ahead and talk about it. To show off a little bit of footage of me giving it a cleaning, a little bit of refurbishing, and we'll try it out a little bit. So this is a Mac Pro 2,1, which basically means it's the second gen of the Intel cheese grater Mac, the first one being the 1,1. And like the 1,1, it is limited to a 32-bit EFI, so it's limited in terms of its use nowadays, of course. But it doesn't mean that it's completely useless. And seeing as how I struggled to get it working and everything, based on some of my posts that you may have seen on Blue Sky and other social media platforms, I figured, you know what, let's just go ahead and do a video about it. Now, full disclosure, this is not the original intro. The original intro had been recording for about 20 minutes before I realized the microphones were not turned on, and so there was no audio at all, not even from the camera itself. So, yeah, we're doing a different intro, but that's fine because now I get to show off the final, so to speak, product instead of, you know, just me opening it up, tearing it down and everything. Although I will use the footage that I recorded and then superimpose it over this voiceover so that you guys can, you know, kind of get a feel for what I had to go through. Opening this up, relatively easy. You guys already know there's a latch in the back. Side panel comes off. And inside there are two gigantic heat sinks, as well as this very interesting memory module that's there. This came with 8 gigs of RAM on it, and it looks like it came like that from Apple because this looks like it's Apple memory, these giant heat sinks and everything on the RAM itself and all of that. I did struggle getting this thing apart, and the reason I had to take it apart other than cleaning is that the battery holder, which holds the CMOS battery, or in this case the PRAM battery, was broken. The positive little metal terminal on there was broken off. And because this is not surface mount, it is through hole, I had to take the entire board out just to get to it. Now, removing the entire board also requires me to remove these two giant heat sinks on the CPU, which proved very troublesome. The research I did not signify that I should have any issue with it. In fact, I watched a couple of YouTube videos. It was relatively easy to remove them, but I struggled to the point where by the time I finally got them off, the little brackets that are used to mount the heatsink to the board broke off the board because it turns out that Apple only epoxied one side of it and not the other side to the board. Although I'm still trying to figure out how I broke them off in the first place, because once the screws are loosened up, provided nothing else is preventing the heatsink from coming off, it should have just removed itself without doing any damage. Now, the reason I struggled with it is because it turns out this particular Mac had some liquid metal applied to it, but it's not the same type of liquid metal you might see on the modern PlayStation 5, or you might use on a modern PC or anything like that. This was some sort of metal alloy that, from what I understand, it's roughly liquid at room temperature, but once it heats up, like a computer usually does, it becomes more liquidy and would then, you know, be a lot more malleable and all of that. Had I ran the system first, which I didn't want to do because I wasn't sure the condition it was in, but I had it ran it first, in theory, it would have liquefied the metal enough so that I could have separated the heatsink from the processor without too much issue. Unfortunately, in this case, it wouldn't have mattered because even after I was able to remove everything, heating up the whatever that metal was did not cause it to liquefy at all. And I took a heat gun to the CPU about 100 degrees Celsius. I didn't want to go higher than that because I didn't want to damage anything. But on the heatsink, I went up to 200 Celsius and it still didn't melt any of it. So I don't know if like over time it just permanently solidifies or if something else happened. I also don't know if anyone was in this system ahead of time, so it's hard to say if anything might have been done to it beforehand. But that's fine. With the heatsinks out of the way, I was able to fully remove the board. And I know I went ahead and probably spent about 5-10 minutes soldering this battery holder on. It took me way longer to take this thing apart and put it back together. And it probably would only take me a couple of minutes to desolder the battery holder, except the ground plane on this thing is pretty substantial, so it was absorbing a lot of heat. With a little bit of elbow grease and some finesse, I was able to remove the old battery holder, put the new one in, and, you know, Bob's your uncle, as they say. But since I had everything taken apart, I gave it a little bit of a cleaning. cleaning out all the dust bunnies and everything. There were labels on top and on the side panel as well that I had to remove, probably about an hour with combination of isopropyl alcohol and dissolve it. If you look at the actual system itself, there's a bunch of scuffs and nicks and scrapes, and so it's been through a little bit. So I'm just going to consider that to be part of its charm. Now, getting everything back together was a challenge. I got it all back together though, and turned it on, and it was very loud. I think I may have actual audio recording of it, so I'll try to play it now. If not, then trust me, it was very loud. It sounded a lot like a rack mount server that would have the fans blowing most of the time. In the event that I don't have any footage, I'll simulate it for you guys so you can see. But I, managed to figure that out too. Turns out I forgot to plug in 2 thermal sensors. In my defense, the sensor connectors were behind the board because the wire harnesses are wrapped so taut that there's almost no give to them. And so it was very difficult to get the board in anyway. So the connectors were behind. Fortunately, they weren't like trapped back there. I was able to fish them out without having to take the entire board back out. Once I got them back in, it's nice and quiet. And you can't hear it now because even though the system is turned on, you can't hear it because the sensors and everything are working. So now we'll switch back here to a live feed. And that's a little too much glare. Perfect. So as you can see here, and I'll zoom in for you guys, here's the about this Mac. Dual 3 gigahertz quad core Xeons. And I believe this is what it came with from the factory. It was a custom order, I believe. The 8 gigs of DDR2 FB DIMMs running at 667 megahertz. This particular one came with an ATI Radeon HD2600 XT. I don't know if that's what it originally had or not, but it works, so we'll stick with it. And of course, it's running macOS Line 10.7.5, which is the official last release that was available on here. Because again, it has a 32-bit EFI. There are workarounds that DOS Dude and a few others have found out. If you install a 32-bit bootloader onto a future release of this, such as 10.8, 10.9, etc., I believe up to El Capitan, you can still get it to install and it'll work. Any version of macOS after that will not work, not because of the bootloader though, but because this particular Xeon is missing, I believe it was SSE 4.1 or 4.2. I'll have to double check. But macOS required that CPU instruction set. Since it doesn't come with it, you can't run anything newer than El Capitan on here. Maybe someone will find a way to work around it. I haven't found anything yet. All right, so all of that yammering aside, let me get a little bit closer to the screen so we can take a closer look to what this has. So I've got this connected to my very versatile Dell monitor, on top of the fact that this supports, unofficially anyway, 15 kilohertz signals, so I can use it with the Amiga, Atari 520 ST, and others. This also has VGA, DVI, which is what the Mac requires because the video card only has DVI, although could use a VGA to DVI adapter. Could technically also use an HDMI to DVI adapter since they're basically the same. And but I have DVI, so that's fine. And it also has DisplayPort on there. But it does not have HDMI, it doesn't have integrated speakers or anything, so all the sound is coming out of the Mac itself. But the other reason I like this monitor is that it has a built-in USB hub. So I've got the keyboard and the mouse connected directly to the display, and then the display over to the Mac itself. So Mac, when I picked it up, was part of a Mac lot that I got back in 2020. Came with the iMac G3, G4, and G5 that I featured here before, as well as this Mac Pro and an Apple Laser Writer, which I think is still in my garage. So maybe I'll play with that one day. We'll see. But this one came with only 2 drive sleds, one of them occupied with a 1 terabyte drive that does not work. So I just went and swapped in a 512 gig Intel SSD, 2.5 inch to a 3.5 inch adapter, and it seems to run just fine. So now regarding the fan issue, in the event that I don't have the footage, or even if I do, we'll go ahead and show it off anyway. I was going to work around it by using something like Max Fan Control or SMC Fan Control. But since I was able to fix the fan issue, as you can see, everything's set to auto, running at about 500 RPM right now. I think the max is just under 3,000. You can see the temperatures of the different cores and everything, 50, 52, diodes 47, 43. Now this does not show all of the individual cores, it's just core 0. on both CPUs, so I'm not sure, what else they may be running at, but I'm guessing this is probably more of like a average of the 4 cores, so not too concerned there. 50 degrees Celsius is kind of high, but the thermal paste that I'm using, Noctua, I forget the one that I'm using, I'll put it on screen here. Seems to be doing a good enough job, though. I'm not going to be running this thing into the ground or anything for various reasons that I'll discuss later at the video. But as you can see, everything is set to automatic. But if I go to full blast, you hear the fan ramping up. And if you look at the curtain back there, it's kind of pushed up against the wall. And you can really hear the fans now. So I'm going to set this back to auto. Let it ramp back down. And as you see, the curtain is kind of relaxing itself again. So, this thing is running a little bit warm. There is heat coming out of the back of it, but none of the temperature sensors were going off. There are diagnostic LEDs on the board itself. Some will come on automatically if there's a problem. Others you can activate with the push of a button. Everything checked out. So, and me cranking it up lowered the temperatures of the cores a little bit, as you can see here. So I did also try to run Geekbench on here. It will run, but it won't show the results because of the fact that it can't connect to their website anymore due to SSL changes. I did try installing Chromium. Well, a version of Chromium that should still work on here. What version is this here? 127.0.64.94. Can't check for updates because this was a custom build through GitHub. So anyway, it's working now. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm satisfied with the fact that it is working. In terms of what it can do, well, not much with a Mac OS Lion, unfortunately, just because of the fact that not much is supported, not much modern software is supported on here anymore. I'm probably not going to attempt to play any games on here just because I don't even think Steam would install on here, the Mac version of it. I believe that was discontinued anyway. Maybe we'll try some in Windows if I ever get to that project. But what we can probably do is try some YouTube videos. So let's go ahead and I'll pull my own channel up just because that way I'm not going to copyright strike myself. So internet is working relatively smooth. Let's go ahead and open up a short video here. Let me pause that real quick because of what I want to do. Let's turn on stats for nerds. That did not do anything. There. So at 1080p, it dropped 120 out of 240 frames, which, is half of them. So this will probably struggle a little bit with 1080p, let alone 4K or anything like that. Let's go ahead and we'll mute the video here. 94 out of 1,000. So that's not too bad. It's starting to catch up with itself. So at least you can do some basic modern browsing and stuff like that, using a third-party browser, one that's maintained by someone other than Google or Apple or anything like that. It's possible Firefox may still run in here. I'm not sure. I know they have a habit of supporting their browsers a little bit longer. But we dropped 227 frames out of just under 2,700, so 10% of the frames were dropped. 1080p 60. It's not terrible. I'm pretty sure that the GPU is working a little overtime right now. I don't hear the fans ramping up, so the CPUs are probably not doing too much work. But as you can see at 1080p, it's totally doable. And if you were to drop it down to, let's see, 720, I could probably... Still some drop frames, but I think that's more because it's trying to buffer. It's only, I believe this is a gigabit Ethernet connection. This is actually dropping even more frames than before. What if I pause it? Let it buffer some. It's dropping like half the frames. That's interesting that at 1080p it didn't, but at 720p it is. Then again, it is displaying at 1080p because it's a 1080p display, so that may have something to do with it because it's a mismatch. So let's see. So at 720p, we saw was dropping frames. What about 480p? Let's start the video back up. And it's dropping quite a few frames there, 51 out of 258 and climbing. Obviously, the display is running at 1080p, so that's the video resolution that the Mac is using, but still quite a bit of frames being dropped. What if we go back to 1080p to match the screen resolution? Yeah, so if we keep the resolution of the video the same as the display, we're not really dropping a whole lot of frames. A little bit here and there, sure, but again, you got to remember this system is what, 18, 19 years old? Would have come out in 2007, possibly beginning of 2008. Because halfway through 2008, I believe, is when the Mac Pro 3.1 came out, which enabled the 64-bit EFI. Allowed you to use a lot more operating systems, and unofficially, I believe, up to Mojave, maybe even newer. Haven't looked too much into that. Of course, though, the most desirable ones are together the 4.1, the 5.1. 4.1 being that you can firmware flash it to a 5.1. The 5.1 being the most recent of the original cheese grater Mac Pros, which are very versatile even today. You can still use them to edit and manage 4K video. You can use them to play games on there, especially if you put something like a Radeon RX 580 in them. So you do have options with the newer ones, but that's the unfortunate thing with the 2.1 and the 1.1 is that they're very limited. Now, again, you can still use them. You can still web browse with them. You can, watch 1080p videos, no problem. In fact, let's see if we can bump this up to, let's do 1440. I'm not going to go to 4K and cause this thing to really struggle, but it's going to have to buffer a little bit of it first, as you can see. Let's see what happens now. Oh yeah, dropping a lot of frames. You could even see it's a little choppy. So dropped about half the frame. So let's go back to 1080p and we'll leave it at that. But yeah, so you can still kind of use it. I mean, you'll be able to use it for basic web browsing, watching videos online, streaming music, doing your homework, things like that. Use it as a spare computer to prepare that presentation for the big meeting with the boss, heat your room because, like I said, this thing does crank out quite a bit of heat. And you could probably do some light gaming on here, especially games from this era, maybe into the 2010s, but you're not going to be playing Cyberpunk on here. You're probably not going to be playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider, even at 720p, anything like that. So I'm not saying that these are useless, but their modern usability is starting to diminish. At this point, I don't think it would be worth putting any money into something like this unless it already has that memory or if you got it laying around. I unfortunately only have another 2 gigs laying around from an old server, which I could get this up to 10 gigs, but 8 gigs to 10 gigs, you're not going to see too much of a difference. It's not going to help, these dropped frames or anything like that. So yeah, unfortunately, the Mac Pro 2.1 has basically sort of hit its end in terms of modern usability, but from a collectability standpoint, especially if you have one that's in good shape, that isn't as scuffed up as mine is or anything like that, you can probably get some use out of it from a retro standpoint. So, but yeah, you can see all the little scuffs and everything up here. There's a scratch right there. And just in general, everything down there by the feet, there's more. And then the other side, there's some deeper gouges. So, I mean, I don't have a whole lot of room right now to even display this thing. If we look over here at my other Macs, they're taking up the entire desk over there. And this one normally even goes over the edge to this here, but I had to kind of push it over to make room for everything here. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm still going to, mess around with this. We'll make some additional videos. Like I said, I'm going to try getting Windows on here, maybe some Linux. Linux may be a better option for something like this. And who knows, we may be able to install the Steam client and actually try some games. Graphics card wise, I have quite a few PCI Express cards that could potentially work in here, but they're going to be limited by the PCI Express Gen 1 slots that are in here. So yeah, I'm not trying to knock this thing or anything because it was a fun little project. It was great getting over all the different hurdles and everything, especially when I figured out the fan issue finally. That was a kind of little bit of a victory for me. Installing the operating system here was difficult too. I don't know if it's the optical drives that are in here or just the burned disk that I'm using, but it would not read from them properly. So finally, I just went with a trusty old Micro Center USB stick, put line on it, and well, we've got an operating system installed. So that's going to be it for this particular video. Like I said, keep an eye out for a follow-up. We'll mess around with it a little bit more once I've had some time to kind of explore and everything. And that's it. You guys have a Mac Pro 1, 1 or 2, 1 or even newer? Share your experiences down below. Otherwise, thanks. I'll catch you later.